Yes, my name is Dr. Akinsheye Damon. I am a global educator and founder of the community-based education movement. My focus is on bringing the community and the classroom curriculum together. I'm an educator of over 25 years at this point. And yes, it's time for us to rewrite the future, and so I'm so excited to be here. Me, when I hear the term creative resistance at the very foundational level, it makes me think about how do people use their imagination to impact change. And so for me, with community-based education, the focus is on helping youth to be empowered to use their academic skills and their 21st century skills and what I also advocate for is third millennium skills to be creative in how they impact change in their local and global communities. And so I love this question because this is what community-based education is all about. It's about transforming education completely. So when we talk about, what colonial structures need to be removed, it's all of them. So, for example, around the world, if she looks at like indigenous, global, we'll say global majority, cultures, so people of what, is known as people of color cultures are more collective in nature, whereas the global minority, people of non-color collective, European, Western civilizations are more individualistic. And we see that playing out in the classroom because students are most commonly encouraged to work by themselves. There isn't any kind of collective process typically in a traditional classroom setting. And even more, one of the things that I realized when I started to think about this is even in our disciplines, they're individualistic. And so to me, that's problematic as well because we are naturally and culturally holistically minded and we see holistically. And so these little, having math separate and science, English, language, social studies, those things kind of are so broken up that sometimes it's hard for students to be able to make those full connections. Most students don't because they aren't, school isn't created to make those full connections. So for me, what I'm focused on is transdisciplinary education where it's focused on project-based learning, and even more specifically, those projects should be grounded in the real world, not just, something abstract that is just some practice, but let's stop thinking that youth are the future and recognize that youth are the now and that we need them now in order to impact change, and elevate our communities. And so for me, the colonial structures that we need to dismantle completely is the individualistic mindset. Just to give a quick overview of the project. So our signature project is the Community Advocacy Project, and that is a project where students they have to first identify an issue that negatively impacts their communities. And so I'll just say the number one issue has been mental health here in New York. In Africa, I would say the top issue has been for access to sanitary products for women and girls, especially young girls. One of the things that I learned and took for granted is that young women in schools, they don't come to school when they are menstruating. And so there's these gaps in knowledge that they end up having because of just lack of access to something that we take for granted here in the United States. In schools, you could just go to the nurse's office and get a sanitary napkin or something like that. So gang violence, environmental issues, as you said. So there were plenty of issues that students have selected with this project. And so once they identify the issue that negatively impacts their community, then they have to conduct research on the issue. So they have to collect both qualitative and quantitative data from primary and secondary sources. And so I want to just kind of highlight that because the qualitative data is actually a storytelling piece. And so it's critical for us to hear the voice, for the youth to hear the voice of the people and not just do, just collect statistical data, but to also just understand the lived experiences of people when we're talking about these different issues that matter to them. This is the student-centered project, and so they get to select things that matter to them. So once they have collected all of this data, then they decide how they want to take action to make change. So it's not just about being researchers, but being action-based researchers. And so some of the things that students have done to take action is if they found that it's a lack of knowledge is a root cause to their issue, they've created public service announcements videos. They've created their own YouTube channels or, social media, Instagram channels to constantly bring awareness to the issue. Some students have taken direct action. So, for example, when we talk about like environmental justice, for example, here in New York City, and even more specifically, I'm on Staten Island, and so we're surrounded by water. We have multiple beaches, and so some students, ocean pollution and just beach pollution is something that's very prevalent here. And so some students even take direct action by galvanizing people to clean up the beach, in addition to bringing awareness of pollution and the problems with pollution, because the real thing is about knowledge, and so sometimes most root causes are people just don't know any better. Or they're, even if they know better, they may be in a place of pain, I'll say, to not do better. And so this is a way for young people to help people to, be able to address that and really analyze that. And so, so students are taking actions in those ways. Sometimes they're collaborating with existing organizations. Again, this is community-based education, and so it's about for doing something for the community, with the community, and by the community. And so the students are, throughout this process, collaborating with community members in order to be able to complete this project. And so, again, it is that Ubuntu mindset. I am, even though I'm not, was not born on the continent, I am a Kwanzaa girl, and so I was raised in those African-centered ways of being, and so that community mindset is a part of who I am, and I know that that's a missing element in today's world. So we have to transition in order to be able to help youth to use their voices, to use their creativity. And so you hear the taking action is really about their opportunity to be creative and how they want to create change in that area. And so it's not about they're going to, reverse global warming in a semester or something like that, but it's about how can you take small action to be able to make small change and to be able to understand that small change over time can build into larger change. There is a strong desire. Students have a fire within them, and they have ideas already about what the issues are and what they would like to see change. And many even have solutions about how to, address some of those issues. So, for example, I'll just say that there are students in Ethiopia right now who are they have a patent pending for a biodegradable, recyclable sanitary pad that they're creating out of some sort of plant that is prevalent in their area that will be able to be utilized for students to be able to provide these resources and fill a need. And so I would say that I want to see opportunities for students to collaborate intercontinentally or, internationally. That hasn't happened yet, but there are issues that are common amongst these young people. Like mental health is definitely something that is being discussed on, in both continents. Of course, climate justice, environmental justice is something that youth have expressed in both areas. And so it really is about trying to find opportunities and willingness of those schools or those communities to be able to create something on an international scale where they collaborate together. But that is the vision, when we think about all of us being global citizens. We're earthlings. That's what I like to say, like how thinking about ourselves as earthlings is so not just how do we collaborate with each other as fellow humans, but how are we collaborating with the planet? What are we doing to engage and respect the planet, and also recognize the resources that are already here. Like I just said, a student has done the research to understand that there's a plant that would be perfect for creating sanitary napkins. That's something I had no idea about. Like there's so much funds of knowledge that we have. And so we really need to start, again, the theme is around the collaboration. That's our only answer. And I just want to say to, speak to Brother Gbanja has talked about authenticity, and I was excited to hear that, because for me, I feel like authenticity is the currency of the future. And so we need to empower young people more and more to embrace who they are. Completely, unapologetically, because that's what we need in this third millennium. Yes, we're in the 21st century, but we're also in the third millennium. And even though we may not be here for the entire 1,000 years, there are certain systems that we can put in place now that will help to start to create sustainable ways of being that the future generations that are yet to come. Where I think about my grandson, my youngest grandson, he's Gen B. Like, Gen B is out here now, and so what are we doing to set up success, or I ask myself, how am I setting up success for my grandson and his grandchildren, to be able to be authentic earthlings, and so I really appreciate you using that word authenticity, because we really need to, our youth right now, especially, Gen Z and prior, have been caught up in trying to, especially with social media, like people want to keep up with the illusion and not be their true selves, but being your authentic self is where the real power is. And so I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Community-based education. That's the answer to me, so let me just elaborate a little bit though. So while community-based education is ideally designed to live in classrooms, and the reason why for me, that's the most powerful space. Well, at least in America, I'll say, because I have learned, this is not the case necessarily always in Africa, but, that's where you're going to find the most children. That's where you're going to have, in America, children are required to go to school. And so that's where you can cast the biggest net to have that access to be able to bring those opportunities to them. Because like Brother Gbanja said, when young people are on their phones, they're just scrolling and being passive. But in school, they are more likely to do what's required of them because they want to, go to the next level. Now, I know in Africa, of course, there are, millions of children in school, but I've also learned through direct experience that there's a number of young people who are responsible for their own survival and are not in school at all. And I don't know if this is the case in Liberia, because I haven't had the opportunity to visit Liberia yet, but I've definitely seen it in the countries that I have been in. And so for those young people, they're still artists, even though they're not in school. And so it's really still about the community providing opportunities to elevate these youth in their voice and to say, hey, I see that you're great at whatever it is that they're great at. We have this issue here. I even work with homeschool parents as well, and so that's an opportunity. I can kind of consider those children to be homeschool children in a sense of their, or community school children, I'll say, because even though they're not in a formal education institution, they are still learning. They're in global school. I honestly feel like they're in the greater school because they are learning real life skills in the moment, and it's not an abstract thing for them. They are concretely involved in it. But what is missing is the opportunity for them to maybe have mentors and people who can help to take those amazing skills. They already have people skills. They have entrepreneurial mindsets already. And so if there can be mentors or opportunities for programs to be created, which is something that I am very interested in, creating programs for those youth specifically, where it's focused on allowing them to use their imagination in order to elevate their communities, with their communities. And so the piece that's needed is the community. It really is. It's about people saying, hey, I have this asset that could be useful for these young people. Maybe they don't even know that they can use their skills to do something that is not only just about them, but also, or just about them and their families, but also about their entire collective, the entire community that they're a part of, or even the global community. And so if we can, as adults, use our expertise, our skills, our talents to be able to bring those youth up under our umbrella, I think that we could see a lot of powerful change take place. I'll just say, I want to first just ground this in a phrase that I'm sure we all know, and that's it takes a village to raise a child, right? And so that's where the village is missing from the education system. The village is, of course, is still there, and children, and that's where the culture lives, is in the village. But not only do I believe it takes a village to raise a child, I also believe it takes a child to raise a village. And so we have to continue to think about how are we supporting our youth in their own imagination in order to empower them to use it to be able to catapult us into the future, but also by the Sankofa. How do we make sure that they are grounded in indigenous knowledge, and how are they using that indigenous knowledge coupled with, the technological era that we're in order to shape the future. For me, as I said, and everybody has heard, I wasn't born on the continent, but nobody can tell me I'm not African. So you'll hear me when I'm saying we about Africa, like you can't tell me that I'm not African. And so, we have to come together. And for me, it is Africa that is the next frontier. It's coming back, it's the cycle. And so it is Africa's time, and all things show it. The evidence is out there, even with our revolutionary leaders in different countries. And so, it really is about recognizing that these colonial systems have created a narrative that is false, first of all, because we have to understand what's false and then be able to move and be grounded in what the truth is. But we have to do that together, And so for those of us, people like you, Brother Gbanja, you, Sister Felicity, and others who are in these creative spaces, using that creativity to come, get the youth, and help them to be able to discover who they are. A lot of young people are lost and think that their identity has to be related to what they see in social media. So being able to find opportunities to really help them to tap in and learn, who they truly are is critical, and who they are in context of the continental society as well as the global society. The world is waiting. This is my real final phrase. The world is waiting for us as Africans to come together so that we can bring the world together.